question is, will we ever have peace? If by that you mean you'll ever see a world in which nobody will fight with anybody else, the answer is no.
That's
You'll
right.
never have that kind of peace. But you can avoid the kind of wars that we have, where one nation has the capacity to destroy all life on Earth, which we now have,
That's
as
right.
well as others from outer space. The outer space capacity now is to triple the electrical network on planet Earth from cyberspace. And nuclear weapons are obsolete. They make big noise and a fuss. We kill everybody quietly now. So can we avoid that kind of war? I hope we can. I'm not sure we can, because there's always going to be some crazy around. But I don't want the crazy elected by me, and I don't want him in the White House. And I'm not suggesting that Mr. Obama is crazy or that he got kind. On the contrary, I'm glad that he won the Nobel Peace Prize. I wish he'd do a little more for peace than he's been able to do so far. But it's a difficult problem, and all we can do, and I refer to one person at a time, because these people have made a difference. You can't do it all by yourself. Of course not. I haven't done it by myself either. It's always been a group and a team and so on. But you can inspire them. You can lead them. You can persuade them. Write a book. If you can't write a book, write a lecture. You can't write a lecture, go nag your husband. Whatever you have to do. And eventually, you can make progress.
Thank you.
Yeah, the gentleman in the hat.
My name's Ed Colina. I was just going to ask you fellows the response to 9/11, the attack that we did have on 9/11. I know that the Al-Qaeda was based in Afghanistan, so I felt that it was justified to go into Afghanistan because they were hiding them or protecting them. And you said something about the Taliban were willing to turn bin Laden to us?
Actually, I read a response that Ben gave to that question a month or two after the attack, so I'm going to let him answer that.
I will answer briefly, but we are making a big mistake if you think you can kill an idea with a gun. You can't. All you can do is to come up with a better idea and persuade them through peaceful means that their approach to the problem is not going to achieve the goals they want. Now, everybody is born and indoctrinated with certain values for which they're prepared to die. Their country, their religion, their locale, whatever it may be. They've got to learn tolerance. They've got to learn compassion. They've got to learn the possibility of compromise. And if they have disputes, if they have accepted the rule of law, which we've got to accept that basically, then they can always turn to law rather than war. And no matter what the dispute may be, I am convinced, and I think Dave Swanson the same, you're better off going to a court even if you lose the case. Because if you had a dispute with your neighbor, you decided, well, you can't agree with him at all, so you're going to go out and try to kill him and everybody around him. That's very dangerous, because we're not alone in the world. And the world is shrinking. It's becoming a small planet. We have to manage our affairs so that everybody can live in peace and dignity, regardless of his race or creed. And my particular trial, the people were murdered, million people, because they didn't share the race or the religion or the ideology of the executioners. I thought then it was a terrible thing. I still think so now. If people don't think that's terrible, then they better be careful. I wouldn't sell them any insurance.
Right.
Can we ask that maybe if you have a question, maybe if we could form a short line here and then each person could have the microphone for their question so we can everyone hear the question?
Do you want to have a go? Sure. Question too.
Well, just to speak briefly to the question already on the floor and agree in total agreement with what's already been said, these were attacks planned in Europe, in the United States, in hotels in Maryland and flight schools around this country, and to go and bomb all of those locations was just not going to help anything. And to go, you know, it's not... if you do go to your neighbor's house and you kick in the door and you smash the windows and you move in and you beat up the family and kill some of the kids and destroy the furniture, then you also do not have this moral obligation to stay and spend the night, right? There's not this fear of abandoning those people. Your obligation is to go down the street to the police station and turn yourself in, right? And that's the situation we're in now in Afghanistan, where our government admits that Al-Qaeda isn't there, that were the Taliban in power, it would not bring Al-Qaeda in, and if it did, it wouldn't make any difference to our safety. There are people around the world engaging in acts of terrorism, identifying themselves with Al-Qaeda, who've never had any contact with any Al-Qaeda mastermind. It's the power of an idea that is strengthened by our reaction, by our global war on terrorism, which absolutely predictably has increased terrorism around the globe through the course of its conduct. So I can't agree.
The question was the Taliban going to turn over bin Laden, which you had?
Well, according to initially the BBC and other reports that I don't think are in any dispute, both prior to 9/11 and after, our government wanted the Taliban to turn him over, and they were willing. And at points, they wanted to turn him over to a third country, and they wanted some, and after 9/11, they wanted some evidence of guilt, and they wanted assurance that the death penalty would not be used. But when the bombs were about to hit, they said, no, we'll just turn him over to a third country, no strings attached, put him on trial. We don't need to see any evidence of guilt. Any penalty is okay, just take him. And our president said no, and as he said a few months later, publicly, I'm just not much interested in bin Laden. And he wasn't, because bin Laden was the most effective and powerful propaganda tool for war ever devised. Unlike the communist threat, this one can never be proven to have gone away. It's perfect. And it was used for a war on another country with no connections to the guy whatsoever. It's the perfect piece of propaganda. And it reaches into our brains, all of us, and we have to get it out of there.
Okay, I have a few questions and comments. We know the government lies to us. There's no question about that. They've lied. Everything about Iraq has been a lie. Who is to say they're not lying about 9/11? Who is to?
They did.
We know that our elections are stolen. So how can we effect change when our elections are stolen from us? We can't get people like true progressives in office. So we have a twofold, what I see as a twofold problem, and I'll just mention this about bin Laden. There's strong evidence that bin Laden died in December 2001. He's a boogeyman that they've constantly raised from the dead. Okay? There's much evidence that he passed on many, many years ago. So what I'm saying, okay, my question really is, because of these particular stumbling blocks that we have, number one, our election system, and number two, and that results, as I said, in election officials who are bought and paid for. How are we going to affect true change? Is it possible? And can we really ever get a democracy back?
Well, I'll do my best to answer that. This is why Nancy and I and David and a lot of other people here work with Progressive Democrats of America. Not that that's the only group working for these things, but yeah, we need to elect very, very different people to office in this country. We need to get the money out of politics, and but we need a popular movement to do those things. And so maybe what we're seeing in Wisconsin is the beginning of a step in that direction, at least for people to recognize that they do have some power. People do have power if they're willing to exercise it. And yeah, and so we need to organize and we need to work, And we need to turn this around. But we also need to educate our fellow citizens on the fact that what we have right now is not a democracy. That we have a government that only serves the wealthiest plutocratic interests and the corporate interests. And so I think there's an education process that needs to take place. And of course, the media are a big part of the problem, so we need to strengthen and support the alternative media so that people have more and more ways of getting real news about what's really going on in the world. I'm sorry?
Only on the internet.
Yeah, well, but it's expanding, and we need to support it. And we're not there yet. None of this is easy. None of it's going to happen overnight. But there are a lot of people in this country working for exactly the things you're talking about.
I just want to add, not disagreeing with anything. Sandy said that ultimately, somehow, we are going to have to reach the point of having a movement of people in this country that doesn't come underneath the heading of the Democratic Party. Because, when George W. Bush tried to eliminate funding for poor people's heat and literally freeze elderly Americans to death in the wintertime, members of a group then unknown to television viewers called Acorn went and occupied the Republican Party offices in Chicago, and Bush came the next day to give his speech about the great economy, and all the news was about how he's freezing old women to death and they're trying to sleep in the Republican Party offices. Now, when Barack Obama does the very same thing, right, and we do still have a little bit of a labor movement left, and they're occupying the Republican headquarters in Madison, Wisconsin, and so forth, there's no pushback, because the president belongs to a particular political party. And so we're going to have to build this thing that's happening in Wisconsin to the point where it can oppose injustice and violence regardless of the partisan label. And that is the weakness that has just about killed the labor movement over the past half century, and we're going to have to overcome it. That, PDA is one of the best activist groups in the country right now. But someday we're going to have to envision a world of activism that doesn't fall underneath that party line.
Hello. I'd like to I'd like to address this question to Mr. Swanson. Yes, from the time that we are born, a lot of us, through our parents, are subjected to the teachings of the Bible and other religious books. And when I was looking for answers to things I didn't understand, I used to go to the Bible to look for answers. And I could never finish reading a whole page because that book was so violent. And I keep asking myself, how are we ever going to become a better people when we're looking for spirituality, spiritual guidance? We go to such a book. And each generation is teaching the next generation the same thing over and over. So I remember Mr. Obama, when he was running for office, said that he wanted to take us out of that mindset that take us to war. And I think, and I'm asking you if you think that I'm correct, that taking us out of that mindset will require that we stop going into the Bible to look for peace.
Well, this is... My son just asked me to explain why the dinosaurs died, and I think I'm going to be just about as able to answer that one. I think that there is a lot of negative that comes out of religion, including obedience to authority and blind obedience, and the idea that the Lord works in mysterious ways, and the way that people talk often about our current president. You could substitute the Lord in mysterious ways for Obama's doing this, and it's 13-dimensional chess, and you shouldn't try to comprehend it. And it ingrains a lot of negative ideas, including violence. But there's a lot of nonviolence in religion. Indeed, most of the history of nonviolence comes out of religion, just like most of the history of everything else. Either religion is going to have to evolve into something that universally teaches not just nonviolence, but also independence of thought and recognition of death and all of the things that we need to come to grips with, or we're going to have to outgrow religion. But one way or the other, we're going to have to get past teaching each other violence.
May I say something? Because most of the violence that I speak of is coming out of the mouth of God in the Bible. So how can you say that the violence is not coming from religion? It is coming from the mouth of God. I mean, it's amazing how much violence is coming from the mouth of God, and this God we say is a good God. So if our children are to renounce violence, they also will have to renounce God.
His wars on religion. We know.
Well, as an evangelical atheist, I encourage them to renounce God. But as an observer of society, I cannot tell you that they are going to have to renounce God in order to become nonviolent. I can tell you that when President Obama accepted that peace prize, he said, "I am right, and Dr. Martin Luther King was wrong." But if you go and read Dr. Martin Luther King's books, he will tell you God and nonviolence and God and nonviolence in the most eloquent way imaginable. So, we have to get to nonviolence. I suspect we may have to outgrow religion, but I can't prove that or know that. So that's the best I can do for you.
I think it's a very interesting area. I might comment on it in a minute after I state my question, if I have any time, because I've thought a lot about it as a Catholic kid who almost joined a monastery. I was at a Jewish temple this morning, and I've been in a mosque in the Baptist groups this week. Let me explain my background. I'm a farm boy who worked his way through Michigan State and learned a lot from an African. 1960, it probably saved my life. 2 years later, I was drafted, and I realized Vietnam was a war for independence, similarly to what the African had just been through in Nigeria. I was at the first demonstration against the war in Vietnam, April 17th, 1965. I'm developing a project because I've been fed up with the political system. I've worked on some congressional races in upstate New York. So last year I decided to go spiritual. And I think if there is hope along the lines of what you've been talking about, and as a pre-med, I studied evolution. I think religion has helped us to elevate ourselves above the Leviathan's red of tooth and claw. Okay, yeah. So my question is, do you think there's any, two questions, if I might. Will you be at a peace walk next Sunday up in Hollywood? Next year we might do it here in the fall of September. I'll be in Washington on the 19th. But the question is, have our religious institutions failed us because of separation of church and state? Because I feel that the establishment of organized religion does not do what it needs to be doing.
Anybody else want that? I'm happy to say that the state has failed us because of failing to uphold the separation of church and state.
I would like you to talk about the idea of American exceptionalism, the idea that only America has the moral authority to wage war, wage peace, as they say. Where did that all come from, and how does that play into what you were talking about today?
I think it's an expression of the arrogance of power. The notion that we are superior to everybody else reminded me too much of the Herrenvolk, the German theory. If you weren't an Aryan, you were fit to be killed or be their slave. People like to be proud of where they came from, of course, but they shouldn't use that as a basis for political action against everybody who happens to be different.
I live in the Washington area, and I have seen the United States Institute of Peace go up across from the memorial, from the Lincoln Memorial, and it's going to be completed at the end of March. And I had just read a couple of days ago that Congress denied financial support. They cut off support for this. And pardon my ignorance, but I don't know what the Institute of Peace has accomplished in the past, or whether we could count on this organization to advance peace in the world. But when I saw the building go up and just the structure is so impressive and free, it just, I was so disappointed when I read that the funding was denied, but maybe, I really don't have any idea what they've done or what I could expect them to do.
I don't think any of us really know much about that. I'm sorry. Okay.
I will say that the last I heard, the House had voted to cut off the funding. You can always expect the Senate to be worse than the House, but I don't know that the Senate has done that yet. The U.S. Institute of Peace has done good work. I know people that believe it does valuable work, certainly we are moving in the wrong direction, cutting off money for that institution and for all sorts of aid and outreach programs. But it has never opposed wars, right? And so my ideal would be to find some people with the funding and the vision to turn this giant brand new building with a roof made like a dove sitting there next to the Lincoln Memorial into an institution for the actual peace movement that works to end wars. That would be an accomplishment. And it might have to happen outside of the current U.S. government. But, just as I'd like to pass a bill that said the U.S. can't spend more than 3 times the nearest competing country on its military, which, everybody would back, except they would vote it down immediately. I would like to see a bill that said the United States cannot spend more than 1,000 times on the Department of War what it spends on promoting peace. And then we would have enormous funding to put into such an institution. But it may have to be done outside the government, and I think we should get our hands on that building.
Thank you. It looks like we have 3 more questions. Is that okay with our panel? Okay.
My question is for Mr. Ferencz. My question is for Mr. Ferencz. In view of the fact that Obama is a former constitutional law professor, how do you feel about his expansion of Bush's warrantless wiretapping program, a clear violation of our Fourth Amendment rights?
Warrantless wiretapping.
That Obama's expanded warrantless wiretapping.
Obama, I think, is in a very difficult position on many subjects because it's such a tough job with everything hitting him in all directions at the same time. He's got to rely upon his staff. I was very disappointed, of course. He's not a constitutional lawyer, as you point out, not supporting the rule of law, the United States being bound by the rule of law. But I know how that policy was generated. It was generated by calling in all the different departments of the government, formulating a policy recommending, I don't think it even reached the White House, but that's the way the government's run. And there are other priorities which occupy all of the attention, and all we can do is hope for the best.
On the Nuremberg trials, the little I read, there were the 3 leaders wanted to execute the main Germans that they caught, and I think it was Truman that decided that he wanted to have trials that was the proper way. How did the Nuremberg trials how many prosecutors were there, and who set the sentences for these people, and
Yes,
how did you obtain evidence?
The question. They want to rush the last question. It's true, the big debate took place before the trial began. The British were in favor of a political solution, as they called it, because they didn't want to give Goering and others a chance to make big speeches. Political solution meant killing a top group. The question was, how many do you kill when you stop killing? As far as the Russians were concerned, they didn't want to stop at all. The British had a number, the Americans had a number, but it was Secretary of State Stimson who said, we don't do that. He was a Wall Street lawyer, and he said, no, we're going to give him a fair trial. The Russians said, okay, if you want to give him a fair trial, that's okay, providing at the end you hang them all. So each of the four occupying powers designated a chief prosecutor and focused on different facets of the trial. The end results, or the principles of Nuremberg, were confirmed by the General Assembly of the United Nations. There was no appeal to decisions of the International Military Tribunal, and that was followed by the 12 trials, which I mentioned, which were done under American auspices, relying upon the Nuremberg trial, basically, and that was under the jurisdiction of American judges, and it went through a long appellate procedure. They were the nature of military commissions, and as a result of the appellate procedure, although 13 of my defendants were sentenced to death, only 4 of them were executed, and I had to be very careful as to which trains I went, and I looked in the cabin first before I walked in.
One other thing, how long did the whole thing take, from beginning to end?
I think we'll talk about it after you're through here, because it's not fair to hold them all up.
My question is about Tariq Aziz. Can you tell us, is he still alive? And I have this vague memory about maybe 8 years ago. He was at the United Nations, and he said words to the effect, if you, Mr. Bush, have a beef with Saddam Hussein, our leader in Iraq, why don't you and he square off in a duel, pick your weapons, winner take all, and leave the rest of us out of it?
I'd like to answer that. I'd like to answer it because that was the opinion of Hugo Grotius, who was the father of international law, who was a Dutchman, and who Greek his name was. But he had he wrote a big treatise on the law of peace, and he said first you should try to settle by arbitration, then compromise, so on. And in the event you can't do that, then the two leaders should fight it out among themselves and let the people out of it, which I thought was a good idea. The leaders don't seem to agree.
You know if he's still alive?
No, he died.
He hanged?
No, he. I don't think he was. I think he just died. Is that? Am I wrong about that? Yeah. Okay.
I'd like to thank I'd first like to thank all of our guests, Mr. Ferencz, David Swanson, and Davies. Join me in a big round of applause for them. We're so often, conventional wisdom so often spewed to us that we have to go forwards, we have to move forwards, but I think today is a clear and shining example of the reason to look to our past, and not so distant past. If we don't know where we've been, how can we possibly know where we're going? Our authors will be available. This is a wonderful opportunity to get your signed copies of the books, and David also wanted to give one brief announcement for an activity going on very nearby, just around the corner. Thank you.
Yeah, once you have bought copies of the book for yourself and your neighbors and your Congress members and your cousins, there is a protest happening right now, several hundred yards from here at a Bank of America branch at 21060 St. Andrews Boulevard. And you do not need any props or training. You just have to think that mega corporations ought to pay taxes rather than taking net gains on tax day, unlike the rest of us. So 21060 St. Andrews Boulevard right now, or when we get there.